and press record. So thank you guys for coming out to another one of our Careers in Science Policy webinars. I'm super happy to introduce Dr. Adriana Bankston. Adriana Bankston is a principal legislative analyst in the University of California Office of Federal Government Relations, where she serves as an advocate for UC with Congress, the administration, and federal agencies. Prior to this position, Adriana was a policy and advocacy fellow at the Society for Neuroscience, where she provided staff support for special and ongoing projects, including SFN's annual lobby event and the Society's annual meeting. In addition to working at UC, Adriana also serves as Policy Task Force co-leader on the board of directors at Future of Research and is Chief Outreach Officer at the Journal of Science Policy and Governance. Adriana obtained her PhD in biochemistry, cell and developmental biology from Emory University, and a bachelor's in biological sciences from Clemson University. In addition to all those really awesome things, Adriana is also one of the course coordinators for the Science Policy and Advocacy course through UC Irvine. So I am happy to turn over the floor to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me get this here. Okay, can you all see the slides? Great. Great, thanks so much for having me here. I've been seeing all the wonderful talks on Twitter and really excited to talk to you. Hopefully it will be helpful. As I was chatting with Paige before this, you'll see that what I'm about to say is sort of my own story, and keeping in mind that everybody has their own way of getting into policy, and this is one way that hopefully can share today. So as Paige mentioned, I currently work for the UC Federal Government Relations Office, and I will also be talking to you a little bit about JSPG and my role there. Feel free to share on Twitter as well. I put my Twitter handle, just Adriana Bankston. Would be great if you would like to share any of this on social media as well. So before I start, I just have to say that my presentation represents my own views and not the views of the University of California. So I thought I would sort of show you a timeline of my progression from academia into policy and sort of how I've not just transitioned, but also my role within policy specifically. So it's sort of a two-part discussion. The first is how did I actually leave academia and start getting into policy, and the second half is more policy things I've done. So this is just sort of a snapshot of the first part. So going from lab work to getting involved in training and programming, which led to more sort of workforce work, and then what I'm currently doing with JSPG, which is really, I think, sort of the start of my involvement of getting involved more heavily in policy. So just to start, my lab work focused on skeletal muscle biology and mice, and using cell culture, muscle stem cells, which is really cool. You can see here, so most of my work was funded by the Muscular Dystrophy Association. Some of my work was featured in one of the Emory blogs. One of our papers was selected for APS, one of their, I guess, features that month. And then my postdoc, which is at U of L, this is a press release from one of the papers that we published, actually the last paper that I published on this topic, which was really, I guess, a good way to leave, in that we're kind of on a high note. So this is just to say that I had a good experience. I had a female mentor at Emory who was really a good role model, and I also enjoyed my postdoc and the work that I did there. But just as probably a lot of you started thinking during my postdoc that I may not want to stay in academia, really exploring what else I could do. And this sort of led to getting interested in sort of the training environment in general. So being at U of L, there were not a lot of training opportunities for postdocs. So they have a small postdoc office. And so in my own search for career options, I ended up starting this craft seminar, which is basically a seminar to bring speakers to talk to postdocs about careers and learn about different options that way. So I'm showing you two talks here from Megan Mott and Yvette Seeger, who spoke there. And I learned about science policy that way, but also other things, and really helped me sort of figure out what I was interested in and not, and also network. And through that, I realized that I was more interested in the training aspect of, you know, the university than the actual research. And so navigated more towards that and looked for other ways to get more involved. Organized a local research symposium, and then got involved with organizations that were in the space of training students and postdocs, such as the National Postdoc Association, the Graduate Career Consortium. And so these both have a lot of administrators that train grad students and postdocs, and really learning about how they think about this, and wanting to, at the time, go into this sort of administrative role and working in the postdoc office or something like that. I really enjoyed doing that. At the same time, I dabbled a little bit into policy. I joined the postdoc committee at U of L just to learn about how their sort of policy making is happening at the university. Started getting a little more interested in that in terms of the broad views that policies can give you. But again, being in Kentucky, really, you know, I was not in DC, didn't have access to a lot of things. I tried to develop some local experience. Joined the Kentucky Academy of Science, which is very interesting in that they do a lot of outreach. There's a science center. It's very geared towards public engagement, but they were looking to expand their kind of advocacy arm. And so we actually created this award for science education and outreach, which is still ongoing. I think it was 2016 or so. And that was pretty interesting way to think about how you can translate your research into sort of outward societal values. So that was sort of the really first thing I ever did that was in this area. So given my interest in training and postdocs, I ended up getting involved with Future of Research, which you probably heard about. It's a nonprofit that advocates for early career researchers. And when I was leaving my postdoc, they were working on this project looking at postdoc salaries nationally in response to a federal labor law. So this FLSA basically mandated that postdoc salaries would increase across US institutions. And we basically decided to do a research study to look at whether institutions in the United States would comply with this, and try to find out also how much they would pay their postdocs, which was not easy. And it was an interesting experience to see how transparent universities would be. And also an interesting research project, sort of more on the social science side. And again, just having left my postdoc, I was very motivated to find out more about how we can improve the postdoc experience and get data. So this was a perfect sort of transition. So we published this paper, which you can see here, the first in a series of just looking at essentially institutional compliance with the FLSA. And again, was really interesting in terms of just the research project itself and thinking about the workforce more broadly, which is sort of where I am now in the space of how can we improve academic training, but sort of more from the policy side of things. And Future of Research, you know, we really advocate a lot for institutional change and trying to think about that at different levels. We do this through either sort of institutional data collection or organizing meetings and then collecting data information from students and hearing from them about what they're going through. And so we started this other project coming out of a symposium to involve more early career researchers in leadership positions in different settings, and ended up having the first one on scientific societies, and just published this paper actually September of this year, about why we need more early career researchers in scientific societies. So this is really just a taste of what we do here, and it's an interesting mix of institutional data and symposia and getting data from trainees and all of that, and just really thinking about the workforce overall and what institutions are doing across the US. And doing a study like this with postdoc salaries was really interesting in the state that I was in at the time, I guess, in trying to figure out my directions. And this sort of really sort of sealed that and made me become interested in workforce issues and policy related issues, really still not knowing where it would be, but I knew this was something that was interesting, and I would do it for free in my free time and all that. So looking more than to get involved in science policy, understand, what is it, how do I get involved, realizing that science policy might be a way to influence institutional experiences and data for trainees and sort of from this higher level. JSPG has really been a great avenue for this. So we really focus on policy research and writing, creating sort of a forum for policy debate and discourse for early career researchers. And sort of not in addition to publishing, promoting the volumes and doing outreach to really try to elevate the voices of early career researchers and their publications and policy. So it's been really fun to explore a lot of different areas. And there's just a few of the things that we've done. So a sample of this, one of the issues that we published recently is with the United Nations Major Group for Children and Youth. So this is here, really interesting topic around technology. How can we make technology more equitable and use it for public good? We did a webinar with them and it was really interesting in terms of kind of intergenerational dialogues. We also had a webinar around policy careers with AAAS, SDPF here, which was really well attended and also interesting. So learning how to organize these webinars as well. And then recently, about a month ago or so, we started this podcast called SciPol Soundbites. This episode 5 was just released. And it's based on essentially the issue with the UNMGCY and trying to interview first authors who are early career to talk about their papers. And this is something that I think we'll be doing for a long time to try and get their voices out there more. So it's been really fun. I've learned a lot of skills in these different areas. And, again, really solidified, I think, my interest in policy and the way of thinking about this in relation to, again, early career researchers. So this was sort of the first part of now I'm in policy. I know I'm interested in it, and how do I actually establish myself in this field? What have I done to really sort of cement different policy experiences? So I'll tell you a few things I've done, starting from committees to a fellowship to my current role at UC, and also with the government relations group. So in looking to establish sort of my reputation and figure out which committees might be useful to join, which societies might be good. So I sort of took the route of societies that I was already a part of, and then looking for the professional development section of that, knowing that I was going away from the research presentations and going to the meetings that had, science communication, science policy, and really other things that I could learn. So the National Postdoc Association, I mentioned I was already involved with them because of my postdoc interests. I joined their advocacy committee, led the writing team, which is really the first time I had ever thought about writing policy and what that looks like, again, in relation to postdocs. ASCB, which is the American Society for Cell Biology. So this was my society, pretty much. I used to go to their meetings since I was a grad student. And again, sort of transitioned from the research section to the professional development, got involved with one of their committees as a student, then transitioned over to the public policy committee, which was great. This was still early on when I didn't really know much about even the budget or anything about how policy works, and I learned a lot from this committee. So highly recommend scientific societies and their committees. It can be really useful. I'll tell you about SFN as well, but SFN is sort of where I did my policy fellowship, but afterwards I remained involved with the DC chapter. So this is an interesting way to stay involved locally and try to do events here, which I tried to do before COVID. But it's another interesting way to stay involved and slightly different from what ASCD is doing with their committee. And then more recently, last year or so, I also led the NSPN Graduate Education Committee, which I'm still on, which is an interesting blend of, I guess, my two interests of education and policy, or I guess, policy and academic issues. All in one, so it's another group to get involved with. So all of these things, just to say, all these committees have given me different experiences, but really I hadn't been in a policy or advocacy office per se until I did this fellowship with SFN. And it was pretty much like a shot in the dark. Honestly, I was living in California and realizing that I was really interested in federal policy after doing all these different things, and applied to a bunch of fellowships and jobs in DC. And then ended up getting an offer from SFN, which was interesting because I don't have a neuroscience background. And however, a lot of experiences that I had with advocacy were helpful in, getting this position, because they're looking for, a scientist who's able to translate research into policy. I was interested in learning policy and sort of a lot of basics. So this was a really great experience. It's one example of fellowship that you can do. 6 months. It covered, for the most part, their Hill Day, which is in the spring. So really get to see what that looks like from the back end to organize. I think we had 80 meetings or so. And other things, which again, I hadn't really ever done before, trying to read legislation and what the budget looks like, which also came out that year in the spring. Some of this, in terms of the advocacy side, involves building relationships with representatives, which obviously SFN wants to maintain, and building this champions checklist, which is representatives that have supported SFN or neuroscience research, or we would like them to, doing research on all kinds of things that they have done, if they've done a lab tour, floor speech, a tweet, or anything, to maintain the sort of large database. So that was an interesting way to find out about legislators and use my research skills, I guess. Some specific things in more on the communication side are the congressional testimonies. So this is something that you write, again, every year, which the fellow, you sort of draft that and it goes through all the approvals, eventually goes to the SFN president, and that's pretty exciting. This was interesting because I had to summarize a lot of essentially 3 neuroscience breakthroughs in the last 5 years into 1 paragraph each. So that was a really good exercise for what you need to actually be doing in policy and summarizing this high level things in a short paragraph. And then we also had a response to an NIH RFI, which again was the first time I had done something like that, and what that means to write something on behalf of a society and what their style was and all that. So really learning how to write different things. They also have an advocacy network newsletter, which is kind of a mix of federal news with society news, and if they have early career researcher advocates who are doing interesting things locally, that goes in there. Again, learning how to summarize a lot of information into maybe 200 words for the newsletter was really helpful. And the last thing that's on here is the ECPA program. So this is a early career policy ambassadors, which they have, which I think other societies have similar things, where they select, I think, 10 ECRs every year to come to Hill Day and then do this year-long, maybe it's 10 months or 1 year, I can remember, program to do local advocacy and sort of this cohort model of, you know, you come to the Hill and then you go back and do different advocacy things for SFN, which is really helpful. And so I got to review the applications for this program, which is really good. And I should also mention that this fellowship, I think, really blended a lot of my interests that I had been developing, but never really did in an office like this, in that I learned, you know, a lot of policy in terms of events, being on the Hill. I'd never been on the Hill before. I learned how to write different things, and also the training side and that. But again, this was more unique, I think, because the fellowship is an advocacy and training department. And so I really get to do both and also help with some other training things that they're doing. They do a lot of things for ECRs. And so this was really fun from both the policy perspective and the training. So I got to do both in 6 months, and it was intense, but it was great. So highly recommend this. It's a great environment in the department. And, you know, this was basically the bridge to learning how to do all these things, which I currently do. You know, we can talk about my transition here, or sort of, you know, the job search. Obviously, you know, I moved to DC from California. I had 6 months to find a job and was pretty hectic, and also learn all these new things, and ended up in this office, which is really fascinating. And again, I think a pretty good fit in terms of, I'm on the research, sort of the research arm of the office. So we have research, education, and healthcare. We advocate for research issues that are important to the system, to Congress, the administration, and federal agencies. So we can get pretty complicated, but it's a really interesting role in that you really get to see all these different sides of advocacy and how to do it on behalf of a whole system, which is another skill. So what you know, part of this, what I do is a lot of it is obviously government relations, connecting between researchers and policymakers. A lot of times we bring researchers from campuses to the Hill. So now we do it virtually. It's been interesting doing virtual briefings with Hill staffers and really high profile PIs as well. And so, you know, we've sort of showcased now what UC has done in terms of COVID and how COVID affected researchers in the system. We've done briefings on some issues as well. You know, there's some legislative analysis, although my title is legislative analyst, but only sort of the bill side of things is only part of it. It's really a lot of coordination of people coming to DC. And then there's, you know, things like I mentioned in the fellowship, right, writing different things like memos and different documents. We have, because of being sort of on the research side, we get questions about grants from campuses that we have to either research or meet with program directors from different agencies. So this is where the federal agency arm comes in that they, for example, wanted to know about grants for HBCUs or something like that. We do some research on that. Or, you know, I would go meet with the person at NSF who runs a specific program that the UC campuses might be interested in or benefit from, which is pretty cool. And then they also have, you know, advisory committee meetings once a year that essentially part of the job is to sit in on that and take notes for about a day and a half on a bunch of things, and then figure out what's important to extract from there and send basically in a newsletter to the campuses back every other week or so. So again, this idea of you know, even though I'm I guess, expert in research, it doesn't really matter here because you get exposed to a lot of research topics and you're obviously more of a generalist than a specialist, which takes some getting used to. And this whole idea of how do you summarize all of this into a very short paragraph and send it back fairly quickly, so the quick turnaround. So this is one of the things I organized here, the briefing on UC research in April. We participated in the rally, so I think we pretty much do this regularly, and it's been interesting to do that virtually. I just put this here as well because my first assignment in the office was to make a fact sheet on AI research, and really not knowing obviously the background on that because that's not what I was trained in, but had to come up with, kind of high level, what is AI, why do we care, what does it look like on campuses, and doing research on that. And then we ended up doing a briefing on AI with PIs from different campuses, and that was really fun. So that's just one example of something that you can use our expertise, but you may not be able to actually do what you were doing in your PhD or anything like that. But this is also just to say that pretty much everything I did in the fellowship I am doing here as well, so it's very helpful. And then, the last thing is professional development. So this is something, I continue to do. I try to see, what is new and interesting and where I need to grow. I guess still figuring that out and how the world of government relations works. So I joined this WGR, which is Women in Government Relations group. That is, I think, one of the main ones in DC, and there's a conference in November that they asked me to join their committee to help plan the conference. Again, not knowing a whole lot about government relations or anything, it's an interesting space. And they also have task forces on health and social policies and education, which I joined just to learn about what they're talking about. So this is a whole other area I'm looking to learn more about. So now, just before I close, this is sort of, okay, so this is my story. I wanted to leave you with a few kind of general pieces of advice to think about in terms of, my story is obviously only one type of setting where you can do policy, government relations. These are a whole lot of other places, right? So this is just to say that my job and my experience is only one out of many. And where you end up obviously will decide sort of what you're doing day to day. If you work at a think tank, you might be doing sort of more research-based work, like what an analyst would be, versus societies or nonprofits where you would advocate for a specific issue. You can do it in biotech. I know less about that area. Obviously federal and state governments, and on the Hill where you would be more of a sort of lobbying, I guess. And so this is just to illustrate the kind of breadth of different titles that you can have. So if you think about doing more research and reporting is what an analyst would be, and this is just one, there's more titles, but I think it's pretty good, representative. Communicating or promoting science, if you were doing maybe advocacy manager or actually being a lobbyist. More on the program side, program specialists, so a lot of these are in government, which is interesting and different from what an analyst would do, for example. And then you can think about more sort of public service, like a policy advisor, or obviously being on the Hill and on a congressional committee. So just to give a little bit of taste of the different things you can do, and these range from, I would say, kind of a research role to being on the Hill or everywhere in between. And I think a lot of them are sort of both, but you can have, if you want to be on the Hill, want to be a lobbyist, you can do that. It's a lot of options. And just want to say this, you hear people say that policy requires a lot of things that you need to develop, and it's true, but you also have a lot of skills already that you can apply in that. Scientists are very helpful to be involved in policy because they really know the subject that policymakers are interested in hearing about and rely on you and your expertise. You understand how scientific process works, can analyze data, think critically and manage projects. So pretty much most of my day is project management, which really I think a lot of these jobs are. It's just a different way of doing it, but you end up doing the same sort of thing day to day. And I think, the things that I'm sure you know about is thinking about how to communicate to non-scientists, and really analyzing the audience that you're talking to. In terms of crafting policies, you want to think about what does consensus building look like. So if you're trying to get different stakeholders to sign on to a bill, or write a letter together, which happens a lot in advocacy, is sort of a joint, these joint letters between different stakeholders. That's an interesting skill. And obviously networking and professional relationships, which really, are the way that things work, right? And it's a lot of sort of where you are in the right place, right time. That can really help to develop your network, but also when you're looking for jobs. So one of the things, and just to close with this is, there's a lot of information out there, but it's also potentially difficult to know where to look for it. Just some ways to gain more knowledge about science policy, which I'm sure a lot of you already do. To join discussion groups, write blog posts or op-eds, do informational interviews. So this is really helpful, I would say, even once you are in a position, because I did this a lot, obviously, leading up to my job. And when you're looking for a job and you want to know about what different jobs are like and meeting people, but it's good to build relationships as you go along as well, because you never know when it's helpful, and just to maintain your network while you're in policy. Obviously, if you're able to interact with representatives, you need to know sort of their background as well. That's also a good skill and a way to know who's who and what's going on. Social media, which again, I'm pretty active on Twitter and LinkedIn, which has been helpful throughout the process in my transition as well as the fellowship. But not to go into this too much, but there's different ways to get into policy, and fellowships are not the only way, but this is something to look for. And I think, in the last few years, it seems like policy, I think, has become a very popular career, seems to be very competitive. And some of these things that I have done, and I think a lot of you probably are, may or may not help in that. If you think about, okay, so everybody is in some sort of committee and has done probably some of this. And so how do you really stand out when you're applying for a fellowship or a job? So I would say that in my experience, as you can see, didn't have a whole lot of experience when I got the SFN Fellowship, but I could tell my story of why I cared about early career researchers, and sort of show that by what I had done with Future Research and JSPG and all these other committees, and put that forward and said, I really like advocacy and I really want to do more in this area, but I am really looking to gain that experience. And so that's something that, they were impressed by that and could tell that I really had a passion for this area, and I still do it, in my free time. And have done a lot of things to let people know, like blogging or podcasts, or ways that sort of people get to know you and the areas that you're interested in and what you want them to know. And so it is important to gain experience, but I think it's what I would say it's most important is to develop your own story and figure out what it is you're passionate about, and make your story around that, because that'll show when you are applying for these different positions. So that's really my takeaway. And the way that I've gotten where I am right now is just through being really persistent and passionate about a certain area, and just pursuing that in all avenues, whether it's paid or not, whether it's my job or not. They're all the same, and they're all connected, and everyone knows, even my boss sort of said, okay, he knows that this is what I like. And that's important, I think, if you want to establish your reputation and decide sort of what you want people to know about you. So just want to leave you with a few resources. These are a few of the articles I've used before, and I'm happy to send you more. But I always recommend this article, From Pipettes to Science Policy by Yvette Seeger, which is really has a lot of fundamentals and some of the things I described today. The other one is this article by Chris Pickett, who is really great and has done a lot of things in the workforce space. So if you don't know him, you should get to know him. He's really, really good at these issues, and has been very helpful in sort of guiding me in policy as well. So he wrote this article, which is really helpful, the skills you need for a career in science policy in ASBMB. I recommend that as well. And then, as you've seen from my story, a lot of scientific societies, obviously AAAS being one, GSPG has been really helpful, and we'll be probably doing more things in the realm of writing policy and training probably in the future, as well as NSPN. So that's it. So I'll leave you with my contact here on Twitter and LinkedIn. So feel free to connect, as well as JSPG if you're interested in learning more. We're also on Twitter. So thank you.
Thank you so much. That was an incredible talk. I just want to kick off the questions. So hearing more about this SFN Fellowship, you know, from you, these are kind of like my first experiences actually like hearing about it. So my question to you is like, how did you learn about the SFN Fellowship, and what was like the application process like? What skills were they looking for, and like what's that application cycle like? Is it coming up?
Yeah, so you know, it's interesting. I believe it was November. And or maybe it was October, I don't remember, but so it was pretty quick. I think I applied in the summer, interviewed around Thanksgiving, and then started in January, which was really crazy, and I moving cross country and all that. I think there, it's a lot of them, and this is the same for this one. It's geared towards science PhDs who want to get policy experience, and as I said, you have to articulate why you're interested in that, why you're interested in SFN specifically. And for me, that was very obvious because I had done a lot of things around training, and they're very strong in that. And that was part of this sort of not officially, but given that it was in the training department, I got to do that. So it was a really good fit, I think, for my interests and talents, and like for somebody who was transitioning from the bench and they need a scientist in this role. But at the same time, I had done advocacy and, kind of had a story to tell, which they liked, and, had to have this conversation that, this is SFN, we like to take neuroscientists. I said, I'm not a neuroscientist, but here's all the things I've done. And, I don't know, probably other people who interviewed probably had neuroscience degrees. And that was a criteria, but given that I had done so many things in advocacy and had kind of this good fit and everything else, I guess that worked out. Yeah, I mean, a lot of application deadlines, I think, are in the fall. Applied for AAAS and different jobs, and I sort of actually interviewed for still for a postdoc kind of administrative jobs at the same time. So I don't know, I was still kind of interested in both. So I was interviewing for both at the same time and trying to see, okay, which one do I like and what'll happen. And I was in a short timeline too, because I had a contract that was ending at the end of the year. And then, so this just was perfect, worked out perfectly. Yeah. Yeah, so in terms of skills, I mean, I think, yeah, as I said, it's a lot of project management. So it's sort of like different in terms of I guess from your PhD, and that you have a lot of kind of small, quick projects that you have to turn around quickly, so you don't get as in depth in them as you would in your PhD. But that's helpful. Communication. So this is the interesting thing, is that even in my role here, I'm the only person that has a science PhD. So, policy, it's interesting in that your expertise is actually valued because you're not among academics, and everyone else around me has a different degree, right? So, one person in the office went to law school, so she does things that are like commercialization. Other people did public health, and so they work on those issues. So it's an interesting mix of like, they really match your background with the position that you have, and you're really the expert in that. And like for me, sort of everything that's science comes to me. Yeah, like I said, the AI project, which I believe was the only one that could do that, because I had the closest background to something like that. So that's, that's to say that the PhD can be helpful in these positions.
Thank you.
I have a question. Thanks for your talk. So in your current position, I guess, or right now, do you feel like you're still able to work toward your goal of advocating for early career scientists and improving the academic environment? Or is it something that you really do have to do in your free time?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think it's kind of both. So being on the research side, so obviously we do advocate for research issues. Now with COVID, there's been more of a shift towards the research environment, which I think, we do have these things, sort of anti-racism, sexual harassment, all these things that happen affect universities overall that UC will respond to, write a statement on. With COVID, now there's been actually more of a focus on the workforce, because what will happen to grad students who are in the system, how many of them there are, what kind of funding do they need, and there's this obviously funding supplements, and this is I guess being addressed from multiple angles. And like I said, my boss is aware that I'm interested in the workforce issues, so I actually have a project on this, which I think worked out well, or maybe I just picked this well, that I'm being on the research side, there is the actual research that we advocate for on campus, but the research environment is a big part of that. And UC, I think, has done a great job with advocating for a lot of these things to improve, these things like anti-sexual harassment and racism. We did a big advocacy campaign for Dreamers last year, sort of when I joined. So there's a lot of these issues that they address also kind of from the system level. The other interesting thing is that we get to interact with a lot of different stakeholders. So like I said, so some of the things will be directed to NIH or NSF, again, who they're obviously thinking about some of these issues as well. The other thing is sort of the higher education space, and that, we also interact with AAU and APLU, which is a whole other thing. I think that's really interesting. So there is this sense of, I guess you're advocating for research, but the researchers as well. And now with COVID, it's more, I think there's more focus towards the pipeline and this generation of scientists and all that. So, but that's not to say I still do these things on the side also, because I want, I guess that's an open-ended question of where I will go from here. Now, so I've been in this job for about 1.5 years, which is good. I guess looking to go more towards workforce issues than research issues, but I don't know where that will be. So see.
Cool, thank you. Yeah, I was actually going to ask you kind of what your plans were as far as getting more towards that goal, or if you're, happy where you are, but yeah, it's cool. Thank you.
Yeah, I guess I would say that, well, so, I've sort of, I guess, dabbled in different things. And right now, all the things are interesting to me because I'm still pretty new, and it's just, it's been 1.5 years of like a whirlwind of, being on the Hill and going to NSF and all these things that I got to do, which is like amazing the first year. So, I think there's different ways to make an impact and sort of trying to decide where that's going to be. So every time I go to the Hill, I really like it. And I want to do advocacy. I want to be on the Hill all the time. Then I go to NSF, which is also really cool. And I can see sort of the type of impact that they can have if you end up working at NSF and developing programs that would affect then a bunch of institutions and something like that. So, there's or something like maybe a higher education association might also be a good fit. So I don't know. I'm sort of looking at all these things right now. We'll see.
Hi, this is AJ. I just had a question. During Hill Day, how long do you get with representatives, and usually how do you tackle on or prioritize what you want to get through Congress through policy action?
Yeah, so for meetings, I would say they're usually about 15 or 20 minutes, mostly with staffers. So sometimes if the representatives are there, you might get to meet them. That's pretty rare. Although that's sort of part of this, I guess, the events that we do. So if you do virtual briefings, a lot of times they'll have their staffers come, or they'll come and give a speech to be part of that. And then, so in terms of priorities, so I think that depends on the constituency and obviously who would support that. So I guess in the case of SFN, you know, something that, so this is actually a good point in that if you're advocating on behalf of a scientific society, you probably will have a more kind of unified front, I suppose, because, you know, SFN is a really big society, but when you go to the Hill, you have this feeling of kind of community and everyone is advocating for this one issue. Government relations is more, I think you wear a lot of hats and you advocate for a lot of things, and part of that is being in the university and there's so many issues that you care about and want to improve. So there's been, you know, things like I can describe like AI. We also do right to advocate for I don't know, anti-racism. So you're actually doing a lot of issues in one day. There are, so in this role specifically, there are some set advocacy days that happen every year, like humanities. You know, the rally, we'd usually do that. And then there's sort of ad hoc things that come up that campuses want to organize and come to the Hill and advocate for, or specific issues. So we had one person come from, I forget which campus it was, but he was working on a telescope and wanted to just, you know, basically came to DC to meet with a certain representative who had supported that before. And, you know, I took him to the meeting and that was the end of the day. So that was interesting. So I think it's a lot of different scales of doing this, and the issues vary based on what's going on. Some of it is political, you know, responding to political issues or what's happening federally. Some of it is just issues that are inherent to the system that we do every year, that sort of thing. So I think, so some of it is kind of reactive and responsive to what's going on in the community, might come from other groups sometimes, right? So if AAU, for example, says like, okay, we have this letter, will you sign on to the letter, right? So there's a lot of this kind of common advocacy among stakeholders on similar issues as well, which is interesting. So yeah, priorities, I guess, depend on a lot of things, and the environment too.
Okay, well, thank you so much for your talk. Thank you so much for answering those questions. If you are not following Adriana, you are doing something wrong. She has incredible information on her Twitter that she shares with early career researchers, which is really awesome. Our next Careers in Science Policy webinar will be on October 28th at 6 p.m. EDT with Dr. Dominique Carter. So yeah, stay tuned for more events, guys. Thank you, guys.
Hey, Adriana, sorry. Do you mind pasting your email in the chat?
Yeah, I can do that.
It actually won't let me connect with you on LinkedIn.